a long answer to a short question, but we can now tie into that for the rest of the evening.
Well, what kind of things are you seeing them doing specifically?
Well, the very things we've been talking about tonight, seemingly miraculous healings. We have some beautiful video documentation where we can see inside the body of a living woman diagnosed with an inoperable cancer by Western medicine. She's gone to an alternative clinic in the Chinese and Tibetan provinces, where they are implementing the kinds of techniques that we can certainly talk about tonight. And in less than 3 minutes, Nicole, 2 minutes and 40 seconds, that cancerous tumor no longer exists. Mm-hmm. And from Western standards, I mean, it's not like before and after. We literally can see the real-time change. And I've shown this and shared it with many, many medical conventions, doctors, scientists, and there's such a disconnect in the traditional way the Western science has viewed our relationship to our bodies and our world in the past, that while the film is interesting, it's not necessarily meaningful to the medical community. And this isn't a one-off deal. I mean, they do this all the time. And to them, it is not a miracle. And as a matter of fact, the people who perform these acts, these feats, they do their very best to distance everything they're doing from any spirituality or any religion. They don't want to be seen that way. What they say is this is the way things work, and to them it is a very powerful internal technology. So this is for an individual. We've seen these kinds of things happen, but the same principles, when they're applied through a large number of people in group situations, they can also influence large geographic areas, such as the peace prayers in the Middle East that were documented in the early 1980s during the Lebanese-Israeli War. And during the Cold War years, some very, absolutely amazing documentation of what was happening between the superpowers, and at precisely the same time, how the tide of global events turned when 7,000 or so people embraced these ideas, and literally, I mean, statistically, we can see the moment that the change happened in consciousness. And as different as a cancerous tumor seems from peace between nations, they are related through the same principles and through this field of energy. And the bottom line is that we all have the ability to communicate with our bodies and the universe if we understand the language, and that was the purpose of the book, The Spontaneous Healing of Belief.
Yes, and actually I first saw that video you mentioned live at one of your events, and subsequently connected with the shooter of it and watched the rest of the whole tape. And I don't know if you've seen that, but the whole energy on the plants and all people saying it was incredible. But you know, I'm trying to tie this together with, like, okay, that woman, for example, you know, if she was having that experience and able to walk away in 3 minutes with that inoperable tumor gone, you know, shouldn't we be able to just basically blast away anything? I mean, once we've transcended that, like, it seems like you're talking to preaching to the choir right now. Global news for the soul audience. We've been doing a lot of work and awareness in these realms for a lot of years, but being able to do it and live it, even when we know it, we still get stuck in our limiting beliefs because it's so, you know, deep and subconscious, conscious beliefs, everything.
Some people do, and the principle, you know, it's so interesting, Nicole, and I've been with many people, including researchers over the years, who consciously accept and believe in all the things we're talking about. And what we're beginning to understand is that there is subconscious conditioning that's beyond simply an individual and a family. It's cultural. We are so conditioned to believe that we are relatively powerless beings, victims in this world, and that either we have no control over our bodies or physical reality, or if we do, that it is somehow wrong for us to use those abilities to participate. And I'm going to use that word very consciously. This isn't about control or manipulation or imposing our will. What the physicist John Wheeler from Princeton University, he acknowledges our relationship to the world around us. He says we are all participants in the unfolding reality. And this is what we found, that many of us are, as much as we would like to think that we accept these principles, when it comes right down to it, when we're the ones diagnosed with a life-threatening condition, or we're the ones that find ourselves homeless, jobless, without relationships, everything turns south, we are conditioned to doubt that we have the ability to do anything about it. We feel powerless. And I think that's part of the great learning of our time in history. Because the big context for everything that we're talking about is that this generation and this time in our generation, we are faced with the greatest challenges of recorded human history believed ever to have faced a single generation. Now, there's certainly been generations in the past that had to deal with weather changes and depletion of resources and disease and things like that. But what makes our time so unique is that we are dealing with at least 6 major paradigm-shifting threats on a global basis at the same time. They're all happening at the same time. And it may be those very conditions that push us to the very edge of our belief systems, because the only way to survive what we've created is to embrace the truth of who we are. And I think that may be a lot of what this time in history is all about.
Well, why don't we, the book we're talking about with Gregg Braden, by the way, is his latest book, just out now, The Spontaneous Healing of Belief, Shattering the Paradigm of False Limits. So let's get a little more into detail of that. But first we should bring Joe Dunning back in here and check in on the currently ongoing mass energy healing. Is it time for a new list, Joe?
It is very close to time, and I'd like to comment just briefly that it's so wonderful now, as Gregg has just pointed out, that the spiritual truths that we've known on a spiritual level for generations, or for centuries actually, are now being validated by science, as he has so beautifully pulled together and put in his new publication, that we now are finding the universal truths that go throughout all spiritual teachings are being documented. And what we have been calling miracles are really unknown laws so far that have not yet been discovered and are just being discovered. And that it is very possible, and in fact it happens regularly, that what the doctors now call miracles have been taking place as we begin to work with these new laws, begin to work with energy work, begin to understand about beliefs, and begin to create the lives that we want based on the beliefs which generate them. So let's move on then with a new list of beliefs, which would be just wonderful. So if each person would briefly bring to mind 4 or 5 new beliefs, beliefs that you haven't already worked on during this show, bring those to mind briefly, and after you've brought it to mind, you can just let it go briefly, and we will start the energy. So if you would bring your beliefs to mind right now. Great, okay. So that will start the energy working on each of those beliefs, and the energy will continue to address each of those beliefs all the way down to that very core or first experience and the feeling that has anchored that belief in place, and will free that, so that then you have an insight or an awareness or an aha and the opportunity for a whole new understanding about yourself and about life. So energy can be a great assistance in all of the things that Gregg has been discussing this evening. So let's move on.
Okay. Well, let's get into the nitty-gritty a little more. Thank you, Joe. And we'll, how long should we go before we check back?
Well, probably another 6 or 7 minutes would be great.
Okay. All right, Gregg. Shattering the paradigm of false limits. What kind of limits are you dealing with in your book?
We're dealing with any limits of reality. What we know right now, first of all, before we go any further, I want to just thank Joe as well. I don't know if she's on the air the whole time we're doing this or not. But,
yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Okay, and I didn't know we were going to be doing it simultaneously, and again, it's good to hear your voice, and I appreciate all the work you're doing, and what you've just said about the relationship of beliefs and science. what we're finding, I'm just going to back up about a half a step. Let's talk about